everybody. What's happening? That's my boy Chris Green. His name is. He's one of my dear friends. He's a British guitar player. He lives here in Atlanta. That's a tune off his solo record that we did last year. And I was thinking about. I was just talking to him, and I said I'm gonna put up one of the tracks we did last year and talk about mixing. So, hey everybody, good to see you all. Define prog, progressive. Everybody's got their own definition of this stuff. Definitely metal. So this is Chris's project. I want to say there was just Chris played guitars and bass, and a drummer named Garrett Whitlock played drums on it, who's a great drummer. He plays with Mark Tremonti, and he played in a couple bands I've produced in the past. He's one of my favorite drummers. He's a killer drummer. But wanted to talk about mixing metal and kind of what my process is for this. I know I never talk about rock music, but this is really what I've done for the past, I mean, not just metal. I mean, I've done all different types of rock music and country music, but I've done a lot of metal, a lot of rock, heavy rock, Hey to Grease. And let's talk about this. I was actually called Chris to ask him, because I couldn't remember what we used for the guitars on this particular amp. And so the guitars are really killer sounding on this too. This is no guitar simulators, nothing like that. We actually used kind of an interesting combination. Maybe I'll talk about the guitars. Should I talk about the guitars first or the drums? I want to talk about the guitars here. So let's see. So we have a stereo rhythm pair here. Let's see here. Going through a sub. I'm not sure why my guitars are, why I can't split the left and right here. It's really weird. But anyways, the one side, I'll tell you what, I'll do this here. No, I guess they're still grouped. Got this weird group thing going on here. Let me delete all the groups, and then I'll just redo the groups again. All right, I'll suspend the groups. There we go. Suspend all groups. So this should be able to work then as to, no, it's still grouping. And let me delete the groups here. Delete groups. Delete active groups. Boom. There we go. Now this should, there we go. So the two guitars, one of the guitars on one side is recorded with my EVH on the third channel, the lead channel. There's really just two main guitar parts. I typically will record one part with one amp, the other part with the other amp, if I'm going to do that. And then I will put a part usually up the center in the chorus. Occasionally we'll do two guitars in the chorus. We'll double track them, and a part up the center. But if I'm going to do something in the chorus, it really depends on what the tune is. And I will usually go for two different sounds instead of using the same amp and doubling it on both sides. If you use the same amplifier, it sounds like what we call big mono, which you don't want. You don't want to have big mono. So this particular... So the guitar on the right is actually the EVH. That was because done with the EVH. Okay, so it's got a lot more bottom end. And I have it set that way to actually where the chugging of it has a lot more push to it, a little more oomph. And the guitar on the on the left side is actually done with a Randall, with a it's got a custom what's the company, something Salvation Mods. It was a custom module that went into this. Randall used to make an amp that had 3 removable preamps, and each preamp would just load in the front. It was, I think, a 150 watt amp, and so the pre's would each have 2 preamp tubes, the modules. They'd slide in, and you just have these thumb screws, and you put them in. And the amp was about a 150 watt amp. I have it in the other room. It weighs 100 pounds. It's unbelievably heavy. So I will typically record, if I'm going to record a left-right thing, they'll have 2 different cabinets, and I will mic them with a 57 and a 421. So 57 will be on one speaker, 421 on the other. So the guitar on the left is the one that's done through the Salvation mod. It's a really great cab. So that's this one. So it doesn't quite have the low end. Here's the so un-EQ'd. So I have the 2 guitars going through a bus, okay, so that I can EQ them as a group if I want to brighten them a little bit. So what I'm doing is I'm boosting some about 740 hertz, about 4 dB, and then I'm boosting almost right around 3K, about 5 dB, because I want the guitars to really bite. So here's the 2 guitars together. What you don't want is, you don't want to have a lot of chug. When you're doing the chugging, you don't want to have you don't want to have that really low end woof in it, which usually happens around 140, 150 hertz or cycles. When they're doing palm muting, it doesn't really matter what the sound is. That's really where you're going to find that. So I'll go through and I'll either spot EQ those things beforehand, or I'll just gain them down. But I usually will spot EQ them, because they make the mix have a lot of woof in it that you do not want. And then I'll high pass the guitars typically, maybe at 40 hertz or so, or 50 hertz, just so there's really no bottom end woof. Just get rid of that stuff so that your mix doesn't get dragged down by that woofy low end. I want to leave the low end for the kick and the bass, and I don't want to necessarily have it in the guitars, yet I don't want have my guitars sound really filtered either, you know? Because if you go through and do that, so somebody just asked, Pete just asked, do I cut the top end? Almost all the amps I've had modded. In like, for example, I have a 2-channel Mesa Boogie, an old one, and I had it what I call de-fizzed. So that really high-end fizziness, none of my amps really have that kind of hair that you hear on the top, which you don't want to hear, that sound. I really don't like that. I'll move the mics, I'll do whatever I can, because I don't want to create a lot of weird artifacts by EQing it afterwards. So you try and record it without that. You try and get the sounds as close as you can. So what you don't want to see is, you don't want to see these huge spikes in the waves, because you can actually see where you're getting a lot of that woofiness. And if I look at the tracks here, I can see there's a couple spots here I can see are palm muted. You can just tell from looking at it. But so if I mute that, so I've got a second set of guitars there that are here. The solo guitar. So what I've done is I've bounced the main lead guitar that happens in this one section, has delay on it that I've actually taken from an outboard piece of gear. And I will typically, wherever I can use outboards, this is my friend Chris Green that has played everything, all the guitars, all the bass on this, and the drummer is Garrett Whitlock, who's a great drummer. I said earlier he plays with Mark Tremonti and yes, Malcolm Young. Tragedy, man. Tragedy. I love Malcolm was the that was the sound of AC/DC. That was the sound of the rhythm guitars there. Here's with no, that's the guitar. Here's the guitar with no delay. This is the delayed sound. Chris is super clean. He's like John Petrucci in that way. Never, you solo his solo tracks up, and there never ever is a bum note. There's not. The guitars are not edited at all. Chris never makes a mistake ever. He is amazing. He's. Now, one of the cool things is we have an organ playing along with it. So this is done on a B3, a real B3. Doubled, okay, like Deep Purple. This is pretty cool. And Hammond, real Hammond. Going between the speakers. B3 with distortion. That's pretty cool, right? So here it is with the same spot with the guitar lead. Listen to this. There we go. This is great. B3 doubles. B3 doubles really well with metal guitar, with those kind of lines, especially this, kind of classical metal sounds like that. I want to say that that's one an organist. If I remember this, that was one of Chris's dad's friends that played with Chris's dad's band back in the day, back in the 60s. And the blend with having the gain on the organ really fills in. Also, you notice too, when the organ's playing the lead part here, because of the way it's mic'd, it has a really percussive, and the fact, because it's so tight with the guitar, it adds this percussive low mids to the lines, which really is Deep Purple. So there's not a lot of low bottom on this organ. It's just really nice distorted mids. There's very little bottom. It's very John Lord. Chris is so clean with this stuff. Here's the organ again. Let's talk about the drums a little bit here. So, so I'm gonna mute the bass. Okay, so I'm gonna mute the bass here. Let's see. Let's go with the drums here. This is a snare drum top. So the other day I was talking about blending the snare top. I was talking about blending the two mics on the snare. So I had the 57 and the 451 next to each other on the snare, which I blended. So I call the snare top, I call it snare top bounce, or I'm sorry, snare top blend. So I've blended those two together on the snare. That's the snare top and bottom. I also have a copy of the snare that has a heavy gate on it too. So I will typically really heavily gate the snare and have a really quick attack on it, like this. Even shorter than that most of the time. So this is something that's short there. And the reason I do that is because that's my track that I'm feeding to the reverb. You can hear the reverb. Listen to the reverb here. So if I mute that track, if you don't gate your snare, a copy of the snare, usually you can mult it if you're using a console, but in Pro Tools, if I gate the real snare to get all the hi-hat bleed out of it, because I don't want the reverb taking on all the wash of the hi-hat. That's what you definitely don't want to do. Andy Wallace technique, exactly. The song's called Once Forgotten. So you always want to hyper gate the snare drum to take any of the hi-hat bleed out. It doesn't matter who the drummer is, you're going to get hi-hat bleed like that. It doesn't matter how well they play. Garrett's one of the best. He's a phenomenal studio drummer, one of my absolute favorite drummers. So I'll do a hyper gating of it, so super short here. So listen here. So if I take the gate off, listen. So the hi-hat is, hold on, actually I had the other snares play. Listen, this is just the gated. That's a super short. Now if I mute the reverb, this is what it sounds like. I guess it's still hitting the reverb somehow here. So that's what I call hyper gating. So it's gonna get. So what I'll typically do, if there's any type of machine gun rolls or super fast fills, I'll duck that down so it doesn't sound like a machine gun there, and a lot of times I'll ride the threshold of the gate down so that you will feed the so that it doesn't sound like a machine gun. You don't want it to sound fake. The other thing is, typically, if the drummer is doing a fast snare fill, they're not washing on the cymbals anyways, so you don't really have to worry about that. But what that does is it gives your you want to still have a lot of dynamics to the snare attacks. Now, let me go back to the drums again here. Let me make I'm going to make a group of the drums. Okay, I just made a drum group so we can play them all together. Okay, so let me play the overheads here for a second because I want to talk about that. That's another thing that that we were talking about the other day. That here's the overhead. Now, the way I have this mic'd up and mixed is I'm using the overheads as cymbal mics, and I'll tell you why. I'll talk about the pre-delay. Was it Job? I'll talk about the pre-delay and the reverb in a second. So typically when I'm doing really heavy rock that has a lot of cymbal wash like this, I'm going to want to keep the snare as separated as possible so it has a lot of attack and the guitars don't swamp the snare drum. And I will typically mix the drums hot with the snare and the kick so that I will typically do that so that when you put bus compression on, it'll tuck the snare and kick back in into the track. So I typically will go probably about 3 dB hotter than it would normally be. But if you listen to this with the overheads, I'll take all the effects off my overheads. And basically all the effects are that I have a bunch of EQ and things. I have some compression EQ. This is that's a pretty... You can tell it's mainly just... You can tell it's mainly just that the mics are a little bit out front of the drums, so I'm not getting a lot of the real snare in there. If I have it over the snare too much, I'm going to get actually too much snare into it, and I want to be able to control it. So then I will typically high pass for a song like this. The song is actually out on iTunes right now, I believe. I think I'll put a link to it. So I will typically high pass the overheads up to about I'd say 400 hertz or so. So that is and he's really bashing them hard. So essentially, this is really all. This is really just cymbal mics. That's why I'm doing this. So why are people talking about all this stuff here? Don't hog the live stream for conversations, guys. What's up with that? Anyway, so getting back to this, so I've got a ride mic, which I've cut out all the bits in the ride, except where the ride really is necessary. So here's a spot, for example. There's 3 bell hits right there on the ride, but that's pretty much, there's a few other spots where I'm using the ride. I cut the ride out. Anywhere that I have an open mic where things are not being played on it, I cut those out. When you have really heavy rock like this and you have a lot of bashing on the cymbals, then it will it puts too much wash in the mix. And hold on here. Wait, let me see what's going on here. Any recommendations on jazz history? Can you guys, since I don't have a moderator today here to focus here, just focus on this and not comment all over this about other topics, since we're talking about this today. Anyways, there you go. Don't talk about the Apple rant. Nobody cares about the Apple rant. I do plenty of other theory things and for all you guys, and I have a live channel now too that you can subscribe to, Rick Beato Live, where I do stuff every day just about on. This is a spaced pair for sure in this. I know that because because it's in the notes. And my assistant Ken that does all the engineering typically, we'll set it up. In the comments section, I'll have what all the mic choices are, and we will typically say, these toms were done with the top and bottom tom miking, for example. I typically don't EQ them a lot. What I'll do is I will dip a little bit of mid-range out of them. I'll cut everything, like I was saying, out on any instrument that's not being played. So all the toms and rides, you can see it, everything is cut out here. So all the toms are cut out because everything else that's remaining there is wash. And what you want to do to get the most punch out of your mix is you want to get rid of as much wash as possible. Okay, this is why a lot of metal bands program drums, because it's hard to control things and get them to sound super tight and punchy. The other thing too is like when the screen's too bright, you know what, it's probably this light over here. Let me turn this down a little bit and then it won't be too bright. Hold on one second. There we go. That'll probably be better now. If I go like this, there you go. You can see it now, right? So I manually cut those out. I do not gate them. And I'll tell you why. Because every single tom hit and ride, anything that I'm gating has a fade on it. And they're all manual fades. And the reason that they're manual fades is because you need to have control over them. Because especially in a song like this that has a lot of tempo changes, the tail end of the toms need to last different lengths. You can't just do a batch fade on them. A batch fade is when you highlight the whole thing and you do the same fades on all of them. So, so I will hand fade each of these so that they sound, so that they have a natural sound. I'm going to play you the toms here. You also don't want to cut. You want to try to keep in the downbeats too. For example, here you'll hear the that downbeat crash. You'll hear that fading out in the wash. What I don't want to say is that's what I'm saying is no peer-to-peer discussion here on this if you can. So what you don't want to do is have these really severe cuts on your fades. That's why gates are not necessarily the best thing to do for things like toms, because I have reverb on the toms as well. So I've taken the toms and I'm sending them all to a stereo bus. So the toms have their own bus on it and will have their own reverb on it, so I can give it its own space, because I really want to have this grand, once again, because of the tempo changes on this, you have to approach the different parts of the tune differently, okay? So, so those are what the toms sound like. You'll hear them. I'll play a little longer section here. Now, because I can tell at the end of this one here, you can tell that's a China cymbal. Now, China cymbals are the exception. Those need to get cut right on, pretty much on the downbeat. No, there's no time correction on this. Garrett played it. This is, you know, he played it to a moving click. For example, it's, you know, 140 here. It's in 6/4 time. Then it goes down to 4/4 time. There's all these different tempo changes. 110, 160, 140, 150. There's tempo changes. There are time changes. So the click track is moving tempos and moving time signatures at the same time. And Garrett was following this. So there's no editing really on the drums. Anytime that we would go in and do this, we would punch a section if we wanted it, or I would edit from another take. Yeah, Garrett is unbelievably good. This is super, super tight. Listen to these fills. I mean, it's amazing. Let's see here. So this is a section with toms and the ride coming in that are both cut. Ride right there. Then that cuts out. Ride back in. So if I don't have that, if you're trying to ride the ride cymbal up or do things like that, it just doesn't work. You got to cut them out completely. That's the only way you're going to get your drums punchy, is to actually literally cut all those things. I'm doing the same thing with the snare drum using the gate. Now, what you don't want to do with you don't want to go in and have to automate this stuff. To me, automating it is a pain, because if you do any moving of anything, it takes your automation points in it, and it puts weird points in there that if you move anything around, it just kind of screws up your automation. So I will typically just go in, I'll hand cut everything that I need to when I'm mixing, and I will then do my volume automations later on. So all the phasing things, all that stuff is taken care of on in the tracking. So there's no phasing issues with any of the parts in this. That's just stuff that you know how to do that, and you know, that's just part of making a professional recording, is doing that. So let's see here. Hold on. Let me bring in let me mute these here and bring in all the drums again here. Okay, so you can hear that ride there, right? It's really gnarly. It's a huge ride. That's my kick drum there. Now that's the actual real kick drum. That's not a sample. I'll play it with no gating or no EQ. Okay? It's got a tremendous amount of low end to it. So that is actually the kick in and out blended. Okay? When I put this is an EQ that I have on it and a gate. This is with, so I have two different EQs. I'm using an SSL plugin EQ, and I'm using a plugin called Channel Strip here. This is old Metric Halo plugin there, and I'm using the gate on it because the gate is really good. It's about 180 milliseconds on it. Those drums are, brother, I'm trying to think. I think those, that's a hodgepodge kit that I have here. That's an old Leedy 24x14 kick. The toms, I want to say, are Ludwig toms. I think it's 3 toms. Or it might be I think they're Ludwig toms. It's a 14, 16, 18, I believe, are the toms. And they're all double mic'd. So they have a 421 on the top with a Y cable and a 57 on the bottom, all blended at the source, right? So so I do have a reverb on these. So I'm using a small room sound on the actually on the kick and the snare. Okay, so the kick actually has reverb on it as well, but I'm adding a lot of top end. Listen, and you can hear that reverb on it. Here's with no reverb. That's no reverb. So so I've taken then the kick in and out mics and I've blended them. So I've got a kick, I think a 421 inside near the head, and I have a FET 47 on the outside that I've taken the 2 mics afterwards. They were recorded separately, and then I went through a bus and I summed them, and I did a little bit of EQing and some gating on the kick out mic. This particular recording, I used a tunnel on the kick. So a tunnel would be packing blankets put with 2 mic stands outside the front of the kick. So layering packing blankets down. So the front kick mic is isolated from cymbal wash. Okay. So I have a nice tight sound with not a ton of cymbal wash in it, and the kick out mic, and then I've got the kick in mic. I blend them together. I make it one track so I can EQ it all together What you don't want to do, you don't want to be running your kick drum to a sub. You don't need to be running your snares to subs. The toms are good to run to a sub because you're going to want to have, because they're all multi-mic'd and they're supposed to all go together in a, it's like a match set. Those you want to be able to move the, you want to be able to move, once you get them all the levels right, you want to be able to move them up and down at the appropriate times if you need to as a group. And I don't like to have to actually group them and do volume rides with the grouping. I'd much rather use one stereo fader and move it. So definitely a kick tunnel. That's very old school to use a kick tunnel. That's what they used to always use. And I would use duct tape, or not duct tape, but gaffer's tape. Put it on the middle of the shell of the kick drum so the packing blankets lay all the way to the floor. The mic stands will hold the packing blankets up. So they're about halfway up on the kick drum, or probably about the height of the kick drum. And I have, so that the kick doesn't move, I have a, why does somebody keep asking about this phenomenon here? I'm gonna have to block here. Anyways, so I'm gonna unblock you after, Jim. Sorry about that. Quit asking me the same question. I have to tell you my old saying that I would say to bands. I'm not happy till you're not happy. That was my when I'd work with a band, I'd know that I wasn't tough enough on them if they weren't complaining about something. I hate whining. So anyways, so the kick, so you build a tunnel, you tape it down, and I would put weights in front of the kick drum. Even if the kick's going to be on the carpet, but I don't want to have to be having the, I don't want to have to be worried about the kick moving. So I've got some 55-pound dumbbells that I would put in front of the kick drum, where the kick out mic, making sure it's not touching it, but making sure that the thing does not move at all. Because these guys, like Garrett, when he's hitting that kick, especially with double kicks, that kick drum can actually move forward. And I want to have to keep lifting up the kick out mic to make sure it's not been moved or it's not touching the head or anything, that it's, there's no way. I wish I could share my computer screen. There's no way to do, to really do anything about it once it's been, once we're in the recording process. And any comments like, what did I eat for lunch, get blocked. So, since I don't have a moderator. Okay, so I'm going back to the drums here. What do I think of digital drums? Well, I think that if you know how to record real drums, then use digital drums, because your recording will come out better. But there's no way you're going to get digital drums to sound like this. You don't have the hi-hat variation. You don't have the cymbal variation that you have here. That's the thing here. When I'm listening to these, you can tell this is a real drum set. Addictive drums are great, but not as good as this. So, let's see here. Can't do that with fake drums. That's amazing there. I mean, really. I have Superior drums. I use it for demos, but if you don't know how to record drums, use Superior drums. That's one of the best programs out there. I love Superior drums. But if you know how to record real drums, Superior Drums is a joke compared to it. And don't get me wrong, I use Superior Drums a lot. I use it for demos. But you got to have a great drummer like Garrett, and then you don't have to worry about this. Because when you're doing the double kick, when you're using Superior Drums, it doesn't matter. You don't get this thing of having the beater head hitting in two different spots, which gives it a completely different tone. That's the thing that you cannot get. No matter how much you program it, it's never going to sound real. Things like this here, these sections, no way. You'll never get it to sound like that. I mean, that just hits like a ton of bricks. Let's listen to some of the rest of this. So let me ask, how did I EQ the kick? Okay, so so I have a lot of I don't know, 7/8K put into the kick drum. I have some I actually have 800 added to the kick, believe it or not. I've got a little bit of probably 60 hertz added to the kick. I actually have top end added on two different EQs because I have a second EQ with a bigger bell that has at 5.4 hertz. I have another 7 dB added, so I'm adding a lot of top end to this. So I'm adding a lot of top end, so it really jumps out of the mix because you don't want to have that kick drum disappearing, and you really need that top end to it. With metal, you absolutely have to have that. Especially sections like this, when you turn it down. So the snare, the only thing I'm doing with the snare to reinforce it is having a gated, if you weren't here in the beginning part, as having a super tight gated copy of the snare blended in with it, with some reverb on it. Now, now, we didn't talk about the bass yet here. So this bass is, those are real amps, guys. Yeah, his sweep picking is flawless. Chris never, ever, ever makes a mistake. He's like John Petrucci in that way. If you listen to John's solo tracks, have you ever heard any of the Dream Theater tracks? Okay, so the amps, one side is an EVH, the original one that came out, the first one from about 10 years, 15 years ago, on the third channel. And on the other side is a Randall, it's one of the removable, it's the Randall that had the three separate, the removable preamp sections. And this is I want to say this, the company is Salvation Mods, I think. This particular, I can't remember now, but he said we definitely use that. I called Chris just before this. No, it's a module. It's a real amp, though. These are real amps with real mics in front of them. Everything is real here. The bass is an Ernie Ball, is my Ernie Ball 5-string. Chris is playing. It's Chris with a CH, Chris Green. So this is actually, it's a DI and an amp. Here's the amp. So I tracked and mixed all this. So I got a super distorted, I have a super distorted amp sound that I believe I did with a guitar amp on the bass. So I mic'd the bass amp, or the guitar amp, and recorded it with a really, really heavy distortion with a close mic. And I'm using that to give the hair on the top of the bass, so the bass blends naturally with the guitars. So once again, here's the rhythm parts with the bass. Check it out. Hold on. Now, the thing that you just can't do, when you have somebody like Chris playing rhythm guitar and it's perfectly played on one take each side, you know, that's the side of this that, you know, that he makes my job easy because he plays the stuff perfectly. I just got to get the sounds. Chris comes in here. He plays down the parts perfectly, the rhythm parts with no mistakes. He does his solos with no mistakes. Perfect, you know, every single note when he's playing the super fast, all the sweep picking, everything is, I mean, it's just so dead on. It's ridiculous. And then the bass and the guitars are so tight here on these things. You can even hear, I left the amp sound in on the, right here, listen, in between the, that's amp hiss. You can hear it. So I left in the amp hiss on all the breaks. If you cut out, yes, the MTS RM100, that's right. I think that's what it is. If you cut out the amp hiss, it sounds fake. There's really, I don't ever recommend doing that on the breaks, all the heavy gating and everything, because I think it's, I think it sounds really, it just makes it sound unnatural. I really like the real sound of amp hiss. I mean, it's not super, it's so clean, and our sounds are, you know, we've been recording here in my studio forever, so I have there's no RF or anything like that. The electricity is super clean. So there's really no, there's no weird buzzing or anything with the amps. Everything is taken care of properly so that you can leave in the amp hiss here. You hear there's an open string, I don't even bother with that. I mean, if I take it out, watch, I'll mute that open string there. Listen. It sounds weird to me when I hear it go to absolute silence. That's actually a 6-string guitar, tuned down to, I don't know what Chris tunes down. This might be C or something, or B. I don't know. I have to get Dylan down here. It's not a baritone though. Chris plays does not play baritone. If I mute the delay. That's, there's no boost. There's no boost on the guitar. There's no pedal. That's straight into the amp. That is the EVH. No. I have a modded Marshall that's like a Van Halen. I think that's what we did the lead here with. So I've got this Jose Hernando modded super lead plexi that I've had for years and years and years. It's got an incredible amount of gain to it, and it's a great lead amp. I'm walking over to it. It's right here. This amp right here. Can you guys see this? This is the amp that we did the leads with here, this particular one. It's got incredible definition to it, great mid-range. This is the Randall amp right here that you can't really see it, and I can't lift it up because my back's killing me. And then, so that's what we used on each, we used the old EVH, this one here, that's at the bottom. If you guys can see this down here, see that's the original, this one here. It's got the 3 presence knobs on it. That's the first one that Fender made, which is really great. Yeah, so it's got a Jose Hernando mod on it on the so it's a Van Halen. It's the Van Halen mod with super high gain with a super lead plexi. Can't go wrong with it. Anytime that you have lead guitar like that, you always get a lot of really weird artifacts in the low end. So you have to high pass it. You've got to high pass the guitar up to where, what I do is with lead guitar like that, because you get a lot of low end stuff in the lead guitar that you need to EQ out. So I always high pass. I'll take the high pass filter. I'll find the lowest part in the lead part. I'll high pass up to it to where you can actually hear that the high pass working, and then I'll drop it down until you can't hear it. And then I'll turn it on and off, and you'll be amazed how much low end woof you take out of the mix. It makes a really big deal on it. But I will not EQ it. I do EQ the guitars on the way in always. So I try and commit to the sound that we're going to get. And then I'll use some additional EQ in the mix. No question about it. You have to, because you want to be able to shape it however you can. So, so the guitar delay, I think that what we're doing is, the EQ that we're doing on the stuff, on the tracking, that like for the guitars, probably use these 1081s, the Neve 1081s there, and the 1073s. So you can hear. So I'm not using a ton of compression on this stuff. So on the mix bus, I'm using a little bit of compression. Okay, so I'm using a Steven Slate Red compressor, but it's only the ratio is 1.5 to 1, and it's only hitting about, I don't know, 2 dB or so. It's hardly compressing. There's 2 schools of thought with mix bus compression. There's Andy Wallace, who I love, who will use a lot of mix bus compression, plus 4 dB, or he'll use 4 to 8 dB of compression, a gain reduction, at a 4-to-1 ratio with the SSL compressor, with it on auto release, and then maybe a 1 millisecond attack time. He'll adjust it depending on the tune. Now, that can sound great. And then you have your other school of thought, or your other school where you've got a really punchy mix. And I tend to not do that when I have a lot of double kicks in a track. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to have the compressor constantly working. When in those double kick sections, you want to have the you want to keep the punch in the mix. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to kill all my transients, okay? Because it will really make things. I mean, if you have the compressor on and you do a lot of fast double kicks, the compressor's just staying on. It's really not doing anything. So the punch with a kick drum, the punch is, you know, yeah, you don't want, Michael said exactly, you don't want breathing with that, you know. So that's the thing you have to be careful with. When and so much of it depends on the tempo. You can't make generalizations on mix bus compression because it's all depends on the programmatic material that you're using. You can talk about things like, I'm going to high pass even my kick drum. I'm going to high pass the bass guitar. I'm just going to because I don't want to. I want to have that low end controlled, even if I'm low passing it at you know, 30 hertz or something. I'm going to totally do that. The transients are super important. You do not want to lose those. Okay, you can always, if you want to compress it more, you can compress it in mastering. So that's it. I mean, there's not a lot of tracks in this. So, you know, since we have our organ going along with it, the organ track here, mixing in with the guitars, organ takes up the space of extra rhythm guitars. So you don't need to have, so I have my organ moving with I have some stereo imaging on it too. Anyways, that's the reason I don't have a bunch of different, you know, why I don't have 10 rhythm guitars. You don't need them. What you need is you need a stereo pair played perfectly with an organ like this. You know, that's a B3. That's a B3 with a real Leslie. You know, we mic up you know, cabinets like that. I've got I actually have an M3 in here. That's a B3, but I have my M3, which is right here. Okay, and then my Leslie right here is my 147, which is a killer one. Oh, there's my old Ampeg V2, which is a great amp. So anyways, I love the Leslie in there. I love that deep purple sound. That was one of Chris's, that was his idea, actually. It was kind of an ode to his dad's 70s rock band that they had this organist in. So anyways, I'm trying to think. That's pretty much the, I have 2 rhythm guitars, I have organ, I have 2 bass tracks, an amp and a DI. I've got the lead guitar with an outsourced, I think I used one of my delay units here to do the delay, and I bounced the delay into the track as a stereo. Here's just the delayed part. That's the delay. That's actually the bounce delay. Here is it with the dry guitar. Delay by itself. So if I bounce it in there, I love being able to use an actual rack delay unit where I have some control on it. I've got some knobs that I can tweak. You bounce it into Pro Tools, and then you can ride it up and down just like you're riding the effects if you're riding a send in Pro Tools. It's no different. You just ride the volume fader that becomes your send level, but you get a dedicated sound to that. So I think that it's about a 450 millisecond delay on that. A bounce track. I mean, when I say a bounce track, that means I'm recording. I take the output of the delay and I put it into, and I just bounce it into Pro Tools. I actually just record just the delayed sound into there. So, all right. That's my little mixing tutorial today. You know, I've been doing this channel for over a year and a half, and I've never done one thing on mixing, never anything on metal or anything like that. How many mix downs do I have before I'm happy? Probably about 4, honestly, before the band is happy and I'm happy. It usually takes, so I will typically label my mixes V1, V2, V3, V4, version. V is for version. And, you know, sometimes you get to a V6 or something like that. Sometimes it'll be a V1. You'll get it right on the first time. But typically you're going to be doing revisions, okay? So you take it, you mix it, you give it to the band. This thing, it was just Chris I gave it to. He went and listened to it for a couple weeks. He said, here's my notes. Go back, do the stuff, but there's not a lot of things on here. Okay, I mean, on the guitars, I have a guitar sub, but I really don't have most of the stuff I'm doing, like on my solo, the guitar solo sub that has the delay and the solo on there. I'm high passing at 127 hertz. And I'm low passing it on the top end at 12K. Okay, so I am low passing it a little bit, meaning taking top end off it. On the rhythm guitars, I'm not taking any low end out of it, and I'm just adding some 741 hertz to it. 700 hertz really gives you a lot of presence. Okay, 800 hertz. Why 127, Adam? Because it sounded good. You just do what sounds good to the ear. And then I'm also adding a 2.8K to give it a little bit more bite and grab your ear like that. So anyways, that's those are some good tips there. So that's it, though. I basically I got the drums. I've got 2 rhythm guitars. I have a solo guitar. I have organ, and I have 2 bass tracks. That's it. So, do I lower the 300 to 400 band on EQ to clear it up? No. I mean, but you know, when I'm getting my sounds, I'm getting the sounds as close to where they're going to be in the mix. Okay, so I'm going to see if I'm EQing the bass at all. The bass sub, okay, so the sub for the bass, meaning where I put the amp track and the DI together, I'm taking a little bit out I'm taking 5.5 dB out at 61 hertz, okay? The song's called Once Forgotten. It's Chris Green. So that's it. That's the only EQ I have on the bass. So, unless I've got no other EQ on it. That's it. On the bass amp, I'm doing a low pass filter at 10K, just to have, if there's any weird anomalies or anything. And I'm adding a little bit of bottom end on the DI too. I'm adding a little bit at 105 hertz. I'm adding a little bit about 50 hertz or so. The reason that I'm taking out at 60 is because there was a little bit of woofiness there. So I will do that. I'll go out and I'll do a tight cue and duck out any type of offending frequency that seems to be part of the bass sound. And then I'll add an EQ after to bring up the bottom end again so you don't lose that. So it still stays consistent. Anyways, that's all for today. Watch the beginning of this if you missed it when I was playing the stuff. All right? Maybe I'll do some more of these things here. What do you guys think of that? You guys, there's not many likes on this video. There's 400 people on here. There's 246 likes. Why don't you guys give us some likes? Oh, what kind of speakers do I have? Are you asking the speakers? These are old event monitors I have. I'm listening through. And I have NS10s right behind me. Those are my main speakers. What I'll do, though, sometime, I'd like to do a figure out how to give you a live feed out of Pro Tools, if that's possible to do. And we'll do a mix from scratch one day. I can pretty much do a mix. I can do a mix in an hour from scratch, where it's pretty close to being it. I'm pretty fast at mixing, so and my room is really accurate here. So anyways, you guys are awesome. You're awesome. Whoever ever hasn't subscribed here, please subscribe. We do everything on this channel, from avant-garde modern classical music to bebop guitar to mixing metal, you know, to you name it. Everything music here. Tell your friends about it. You guys are awesome. See you later.